Ilvatara, the Aura News from here. How does it look from Albania?
As bad as everywhere else, I guess. Doesn't look good. But first thing I would like to say to this panel that you invited me to talk is that you cannot afford to think that I will speak on pre-digested ideas or on Brussels euphemistic language, because I'm here to claim that. What you will hear is what my gut and my experience tells me about the challenges that my profession is facing in Albania. So when I first started as a journalist, that was more than 20 years ago, I was handwriting my notes, I was using an old, noisy typewriter to prepare the news items, and I didn't have computer access or internet. 20 years later, we are living in an entirely new world. Our smartphones, that I had to hide it now because it kept ringing, are ruling our lives. They have invaded digital sphere with countless news sources from everywhere. So I remember in the 90s I had only one screen in front of my desk, and that was a public broadcaster which was state-owned and the sole TV channel in Albania back then. So I was a junior journalist in my newsroom, and because of the political crisis and the uprising of the pyramid schemes, I found myself covering the electoral campaign of the then President of the Republic at the age of 20. So I remember we were traveling, we were starting our days at 4 a.m. in the morning and going in rallies in different towns of Albania and coming back late evening in the editing rooms to find a political representative whose role was to tell us what footage we should show, the right to be shown, and as such, what were wrong, that we needed to be killed. So self-censorship back then didn't sound as bad as self-censorship that my colleagues, journalists, had to apply in the next decades if they wanted to remain in the media industry. And self-censorship I'll put as threat number one in my humble list that I have prepared. So while preparing for this speech for today's conference, before Tim emailed us about not being boring and having the fact that having a written speech never works, so that was too late for me. But I was reminded of one of George Orwell's brilliant pieces when he talks about the fact that when the general atmosphere is bad, language must suffer, because those in power have a reluctance to own up to uncomfortable truths, both small or large. So Orwell blamed largely the political corruption. I somehow disagree right now. We are not in 1984 anymore, and I believe all of us have to be blamed if we don't bear the responsibility to resist to this situation by thinking, writing, analyzing, or broadcasting more clearly. So personal responsibility I would count as threat number two. And by personal responsibility, I mean being able to learn to respect and to use our brains and our instincts, hence grappling with hard work. And I know I may sound to some of our colleagues here old school, but I believe that even though the technological revolution has shaken our profession, I still believe that the core values of being a journalist has remained the same: the struggle to search for the truth, no matter how hard it is to define it, and even harder to find it, especially in our countries. So for now, the pursuit for truth is even more complicated. We are sailing in a tsunami of countless news sources, thanks to the social media that regrettably, even though it was widely believed, would have transformed for better, made journalism more transparent, accurate, reachable. Actually, it has turned out to be a letdown by misinformation that is being paid for, or organized campaign, or calculated campaign, and people are being used as algorithms for news sharing from the online industry. So I would put as threat number three, pursuit of truth in the list. Just to give a little brief information about Albania, we have a lot of media. Tim mentioned earlier 30 titles newspaper, but we have 56 TV channels, 200 cable platforms, 750 registered portals, and we're talking about 2.8 million inhabitants. We have 1.5 million Facebook accounts and an online TV of the current Prime Minister called ERTV. So there goes number threat 4. So plenty of insider information available. The bigger the possibility to find the truth, the bigger the picture, the easier should be for the truth to get lost. And that's what we're experiencing. More sources available, less truth discovered. How, and it comes after 20-something years of experience, it comes to a point that you ask yourself, how are you contributing to your future, to the present future of your kids, and by your daily job? Is it still worth doing this job? And of course, the answers are not easy to find, and the deep question for reflection is hunting some journalists, I believe, in my country or even in Western Balkans, because the shadowy interchange between media, politicians, and businesses is more pronounced in our non-liberal societies, and I do believe Western Balkans do fall in that category. But yet, as Commissioner Hahn mentioned, these problems are worldwide shared among journalists, as it was the case in Malta, Turkey, or Hungary, and so on. So freedom of truth becomes the threat number 5 in my list, and by freedom of truth, I believe that it is easier to find and to contribute to the truth in a competitive arena rather than to emerge because of some clickbaits that we are all using now. And to come to the main topic of this conference, how media is helping as well in EU accession in Albania, mostly, and this is threat number 6. I do believe, and this is a personal opinion, EU-related news are cold, reasonable, too complicated, and they lack of stories from daily life. They are like disconnected from normal people. They don't really understand what EU is. And forgive me by saying this, but of course, explaining EU has been a failure somewhere else as well. We have Brits and Brexit. So what is really happening with the EU is that we have in Albania showing some footage of meetings in Brussels from EU and Albanian politicians, and that's it. We are lacking this connection, this interpretation of what EU means, because media is changing, EU has dramatically changed, the integration process has not changed, not for good in my opinion. So we need to bond, and please, my Brussels friend base, don't take this as another list of priorities that should be met from Albania as an obligation. I see more like a suggestion to create a platform of communication of the EU properly, not only from the politician's point of view, but what EU is. So this is what I would suggest to have in the future. And I have another list, I have the number 7 in the list of threats, and that is, and I believe in most other Western Balkan countries, the bondage between media and politics. The stronger and the fleshier the relationship is between media stakeholders and the journalists, the bigger the sin is from a journalist. There is an urgent need, especially in Albania, for journalists to go back to basics, back to traditional values where the truth was slow to find but was serious, not fast and fake as it is now, as it appears to be now. Also, a good journalist, as the majority of my colleagues in my country strive to be, should fight for traditional values, should fight for integrity, should fight for honesty, for balance in their reporting. Politicians in this country should stop using compromised relationships with media stakeholders and start a new, clean, fresh, clean, sober relationship with journalists. And I count that as major threat number 8. Stand up for values and for good journalism and quality journalism. Commissioner Hahn mentioned that it's not going to be easy. It's always a struggle, but we should, all of us, we should answer some difficult questions that I personally do have almost every day. So why do I seek quality when the pressure of time is so hard to keep up with, and someone else who is not seeking quality is already publishing something else, the same news as well. So why do I try to be objective when bias pays off? Other parts can pay for it as well. Why do I go to the trouble and investigate when people seem to be tired of propaganda and they are almost paralyzed? So why? And as I said earlier, I don't have all the answers, but I do know that it's now more than ever time for us, for journalists, to stand up and to fight for what we believe is right and just. I'm almost closing my remarks. Winston Churchill said that the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. So when Churchill said that he believed in the sacred value of truth, of course, one of his main amusements was to smoke cigars or writing poetry. But in today's world, the free leader of the world, as the US president is regarded to be, he amuses himself by raging with his Twitter account against journalists and media in his country. Also, in Albania, major politicians, current prime minister, former prime minister, they are heavily users of social media. And what we journalists, we have done, we have fallen into the trap of broadcasting whatever they are publishing out there in the social sphere without checking, without fact-checking, without looking for objectivity, without even seeking if that's true what they are broadcasting. So we are lowering ourselves in being just a propaganda tool instead of being a watchdog institution as the fourth estate of democracy. So in the end, allow me to conclude by hoping that journalists, starting from myself, will be seeking truth by becoming more and more, that truth, I do believe, has become a more and more rare commodity to find. And we need to go back to traditional values, to integrity, and to keep a healthy distance from poisonous sources that come from digital or physical actors, factors, fakeness, you name it. So good luck to us. And the number 10 thread that I have, it could not be out of this remarks is, yes, our media is in trouble indeed, but truth should prevail. Thank you.